Hey, everybody. We are here with Tiffany Schreane for our next marketing spotlight here with Digital Summit. Thanks for joining us, or thank you for watching the recording if you get to it later. Tiffany, how are you?
I am good, Kip. How are you?
I'm good. You clearly have a lot more hair than I do. I'm jealous.
Listen, this is a mix of trying and a little bit of challenging at the same time. So we're gonna see how this plays out.
I love it. It's good. Yeah, we wing it here. This is totally informal, and it's a chance for us to get to spotlight some of our amazing speakers we've had and some of the really smart, intelligent people that are out there in the marketing community. So,
Yeah.
you are in good company, a smart,
Yes.
intelligent people as I tee that up. So, by way of introduction, Tiffany Schreine is a marketing and advertising expert with over a decade of experience working with Fortune 500 clients globally and domestically. Her background includes media director roles with Publicis Media and Ubiquity. She's executed and analyzed more than 1,000 advertising campaigns, and that's a lot for
That's a
someone so
lot.
young.
That's a
Companies
lot.
such as Verizon, Nestle, Toyota, and JP Morgan, they've got some serious budgets, I'm
Yeah.
telling you. Additionally, Tiffany's industry experience with cost benchmarking and competitive analysis and has managed and analyzed more than 10 billion in advertising spend. She's a marketing and advertising adjunct lecturer with Fashion Institute Technology in New York and the Borough of Manhattan Community College, which we were just discussing here a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Welcome, Tiffany. So tell us a
Thank
little bit
you.
more about your background and your company.
Thank you. Well, let me start by saying when you said I was an adjunct lecturer with Fashion Institute of Technology, I was like, well, the good news is this shirt is a Digital Summit shirt, so I don't feel so I don't feel so out of sync with my profession. So yes, thank you, Kip. All of that is correct actually. I started out so funny. The interesting story is I was taking a college course at my school back home in Tennessee, and we were doing a last minute, teaching you how to do resumes, teaching you how to apply for jobs. And I'm probably going to age myself here by saying we were going through Munster and I think hot jobs at the time. And my professor goes, well, none of you are going to get any of these jobs, but you at least need to know how to apply for a job. And so I was like, okay, I'll apply for a job in New York, follow my sister who was already here. And then I applied for the job. And then they're like, oh, do you want to come in for an interview? And I said, absolutely. So I was probably in about 6 weeks, graduated college, had a job here in New York. So that's a little bit of a fun fact about me. So I started working in advertising at that point. And then moved on a little bit into data analytics, which I ended up loving, which is interesting because in high school, math was the most challenging part for me. But once I got to college and took this word problem course, and I was like, what did I get into taking a word problem class? And then I was like, oh, well, I can understand if Sally had 5 apples and gave Linda three. How many apples does Sally have left? That's a story. That's a narrative. I can make that make sense as opposed to solving for X. What has X done
I
for
dig
me?
it.
So here I am. Here I am here. I teach maybe a couple, about 2 or 3 times a week. Very interesting students that I have in my class who thinks that the first thing we're going to talk about is TV and print and digital. And I'm like, so we're going to talk about packaging and supply chain management and how that impacts marketing. And they're like, oh, I didn't sign up for this. But we find a way to make it interesting and fun. So it's all good.
Yeah, yeah. And then tell us about your company. I understand you just started your own agency then after years
Yes.
on the agency side.
Yes, yes. So after a little bit over a decade, as you mentioned, I started Optilytics Media, which is essentially an agency that ties in data analytics with marketing. So, other than just really listening to your brand voice or listening to your target audience and things, the typical briefings that most agencies give to their clients, we actually want to make sure that we root everything in data. So, we're looking at what are the, as we call it, KPIs in the marketing industry, your key performance indicators. What are the target things that you want to hit? Are you looking at hitting, X amount of viewers for a website? How are we going to go about doing that? What steps do we take? What are the objectives to help us hit that number? And maybe we don't hit that number. That's not a bad thing. We can use that number as a benchmark moving forward to understand what we did to achieve that number, and what can we do to kind of use that as almost like a trampoline, if you will, to kind of jump off of that and go to the next. So it's really fun for me because I'm
Mhm.
tying in two things that I love: the creativity of marketing. I'm not a creative person when I mean that. Creativity meaning understanding how to kind of pull strategies together and campaigns together to make something work, particularly with smaller to mid-sized companies that have little to no budget. So I always like to say I'm taking, Marriott or international hotel groups budgets for advertising, and I'm applying it to small boutique hotels who have very little budget, and giving those a bigger market strategies to those smaller market houses, and making tying those numbers into that. So it's almost like an educational thing for both my company, the employees that I have, as well as my clients. What are these numbers telling us, and what can we do to kind of bridge the gap in the stories?
Interesting. So you mentioned small and medium companies. We got our conference this month, which that is the theme on small and medium businesses
Yeah,
for those
yeah.
marketers that are at those smaller companies that don't have, a team of 8 just to run social. We
Mm-hmm.
find that there's a lot of these one-man bands or people who are like, hey, there's only 2 of us on a small budget.
Yeah.
So we've carved out a conference just specifically for that. So we're excited about that one this month. But I wanted to touch on a couple of things you said there. What I
Yeah.
find interesting is, I was on a big brand side, and I
Mm-hmm.
worked with some of those larger agencies that you're familiar with on media
Mm-hmm.
planning and $1 million budgets and those things. So how does that work for carving yourself a New York agency, attracting the small and the medium businesses that don't have those huge budgets and things?
The first thing that I always say is that we're going to take paid advertisement off the table for right now. That doesn't mean don't do paid ads. I always want to make sure I preface it with saying that, because paid ads help with something, and we're going to talk about that probably later. But what
Yeah.
we want to understand as small to medium sized businesses are what are the current channels that we own. So TV and radio and digital are great, but you don't necessarily own a TV or radio or a digital channel. What you do
Right.
own digitally is your website. So now let's look at your website and let's see what that's telling your target audience. Let's see if you're doing things like a push or pull marketing campaign where you're essentially putting together a case study or putting together white papers for people to download. Let's look and see what your social media channels are saying. Are you
Mm-hmm.
essentially
Mm-hmm.
using social media as a business as you should be? I always say that social media is a very interesting intersection of marketing and business, because that is one of the channels that businesses can use to directly communicate with their customers. No in between, no static, no noise. It's just your
Yeah.
social media manager, who would I always say is like a most valuable player at a company, particularly over the last year or so. What are your social media channels communicating to your target audience? Next, we're going to look at any earned media. This is not necessarily something that the businesses own, for people who are not really familiar with that out there in YouTube or Facebook land. But what you're looking at is, what has your business done to earn media? Is it simply that it just opened? Is it simply that it's
Mm-hmm.
giving you a little bit more of a niche compared to what your competitors are doing? So what you want to do is see what almost kind of public relations, or what articles or traction or it's picking up about your business,
Yeah.
to help couple it with that own strategy. So those are some of the two main, really I call them pillars, out of the three main pillars in marketing. The two main pillars in marketing that little to no budget, it really takes a lot of resources, if you will, in-house, to kind of get that name out there, get your awareness out there, so that you're targeting large scales of people, without really breaking the bank.
Yeah, I guess another way to phrase that is, let's start talking, everyone is familiar with the funnel. Let's start
Mm-hmm.
talking about the things you're doing further down in the funnel, because if you're
Yep.
not optimizing and you're not winning there, why
Mm-hmm.
are we worried about what your media spend is doing? Because you're driving somewhere might not be necessarily getting the conversions.
Exactly, exactly. And I
Yeah.
always say, when you start spending money and you don't really see a needle moving, it's time to go back and look at some of the other stuff. I actually had experience once where I was like, you know what, let's look at the product, and let's see what your competitors are doing, because regardless of how much advertising you put out there, if people don't want to buy it, they're not going to buy it.
Yeah.
So I kind of saved the paid to the end for that reason. But yeah, everything that you said, and I agree with that.
It's I've been in this game long enough that that's not how the conversation went back in the day. I can remember when early on in digital, when we were begging for a seat in the room, and there
Uh-huh.
was an old adage that said, no brand manager ever got fired for recommending more advertising. Right?
Yeah, that is
Right?
true.
Yeah. And so now it's like, not only does digital have a seat at the table, but every role involves digital now.
Yeah.
So they have to understand the data and the analytics. So as you've jumped more into that and carved your niche in that space, are you finding that there's a what do I say? There's appetite, or there's definitely room for you, because people are like, you know what, we kind of need help interpreting these things, this data, or where to go strategically with what we have now.
Mm-hmm. I will say there is appetite, but when you start talking numbers and you're not talking money, you're gonna lose the interest of everyone in the room. They're not gonna be too concerned about that. They're only concerned about the money when they're seeing numbers on a board. So what you have to kind of do is explain, and that's where I come in for Optilytics Media. I will come in and explain, this is why this data is so important, because at the end you're caring about money. True. Everyone in this room is right now, or virtual room, if you will. Everyone in this room is right now. We have to worry about the data behind if the campaign is working before we can understand why more money isn't coming in. So it's numbers and numbers, but these numbers come first, and we have to worry about these numbers first, because if it's not working, what you're doing is you're actually wasting money. And if people are working on it, you're wasting money on the people who are working on it. So we have to kind of worry about those numbers first. And once I kind of tweak that in and start saying, mitigating dollars, they're like, oh, wait, mitigating dollars? What are we doing here? And that's the one thing that kind of grabs their attention. So I have to kind of sell it a bit. And selling it a bit is fine. And it's not really that big of a thing. Probably when my first start off, it was a little bit of a thing, because data analytics within advertising, as you know, it's always been around, but it's until recent years become a bigger thing now. So it's not really that much of a selling point now, but it's really just making sure you can kind of hone that message in about 1 or 2 sentences to really get them to understand it and get them to understand why it's important.
Yeah. And so curious, when starting your own agency, are you all about like the RFP process, or how are you finding business? Like, where are you finding, where are you, we don't have to give away all the secrets.
No,
what's working for you?
I'm very transparent on this, and shameless plug here. I talk about a lot about what I do on Twitter as well. My Twitter name is Tiffany Schreine as well. I talk about a lot about on Twitter as well, because I'm very transparent about the RFP process. I will say this: my first client was my really good friend. Okay, he has his own retail company. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to be able to, do a job and like really understand your strategy and really understand your campaign. I'm going to have to quit and start something all up from the ground up and really start honing in there. So it really is true. Once you get that first gig and you get that first thing out the door, you will be surprised at, people who maybe your client is reaching out to, or maybe your client is doing interviews and they're mentioning your agency by name. The clients will come rolling in. We on the agency side, and me being a small business specifically, have to make sure that I'm continuing to keep myself relevant, doing things like talking to Digital Summit, doing things like writing for American Marketing Association or or doing things like, being mentioned in Fortune was a huge one for me, primarily because people are going to need to understand more about you and who you are. The RFP process, I do keep it a little bit close to the belt, primarily because I can call him my mentor, but my last boss told me a very interesting story once when I was confused as to why one person was being promoted to the CEO of an agency. And I was like, wait, I always thought the business worked this way. And he told me, he said, no, Tiffany, CEOs primarily, they're the ones who close the deal. So if you know how to close a deal, you can be a great CEO. And my thought process is always, the CEO is the hardest working person. They're always at work. They're in the Excel files and in the data. And yeah, you're going to be doing a little bit of that too, especially once you're starting off. And me, who's just kind of a geek when it comes to that stuff, that is stuff that excites me. But I am the person when my vice president is sending emails out, curating leads, and understanding, who would work best for our company. I'm the person who, if she's saying, you know what, we're about to close this deal, but I think I may need a little bit of a push, I'm the person who kind of comes in and do that final push to make sure that everything gets done. And then I'm back to looking at leads again, back to scoping LinkedIn Navigator again, back to, networking again. So I will say, if I could, say this in the best way, that is probably the part of my job that surprised me the most, is how much networking you do have to do. It kind of takes away from the fun stuff that I want to do, which is working on the campaigns and working on the strategy. But someone has to do that in order to keep the bills paid, in order to keep money coming in.
Yeah, I remember when I was on the agency side, And I quickly learned that the work-life balance wasn't for me, especially when you're at the lower level and trying to work your way up. But I remember
Yeah.
having this things thinking, oh wow, people at the executive level are like, they're just like work hard. But one, they're usually really high billable rates, so they're not going to be on an account and stuff, but they usually are coming as a closer, or they're kind of the face of the company. But I think you gave really great advice for the smaller agencies and businesses out there that the way to publicize and be thought of as a subject matter expert is you got to like participate in anywhere you can, whether it's digital summits or finding those open writing opportunities where you can be a guest blogger or things like that.
Yeah.
So kudos to you guys for working on that. So what are some of the topics you've been teaching at the university?
Wow. So we pretty much talk about the top 4 P's in marketing. I think I looked at one point, there were 6 P's, and there were 7, and there were 11. I was like, I didn't know we had that many words in the English language that starts with a P, but okay. But we primarily cover the basic 4. So before someone says there's more than 4 now, we cover the first 4 that we talk about. We talk about product, packaging, placement, and promotion. We always talk about promotion last, and I feel bad because the kids want to talk about promotion first because that's what they know about. But I always say, before we even get to the promotion, you have to talk about your product, because if you don't have a product, then everything else is kind of null and void.
You have nothing to
So
promote.
exactly. So primarily really digging into analyzing all 4 of those areas and making sure they understand the basics of a product, making sure that they are understanding the basics of segmenting a target audience and understanding who their target audiences are, packaging and how important that can be, and making sure that you know how they're positioning their brand and the message that they want to communicate to their target audience, and even something as much as in their logo and their color and their style, using that to attract the target audience of people. Where we talk about, and supply chain management is a huge one within packaging that we talk about. I always kind of make that class a little bit exciting because I'm always asking, where are all of the places that you can get, a fruit from? I said, when I was younger, you could either go to just like an outdoor market or you can go to a grocery store. But where else can you guys go? And like, it's 2021, so people are like, oh, we can go to the bodega. And someone's like, oh, I go to my bagel guy. He just started selling fruit. So it's like you hear all of these crazy answers because there's so many different places to get so many different things now, especially after 2020 when everything kind of, went innovative crazy. So we talk about that. We look at the of it all, the distribution. How are you going to get packages or get your information to people? We talk about global marketing a little bit, particularly talking about placement, and I like that because it gets people really thinking about how beneficial is it for any company to go global. And of course, everyone's thinking Apple and they're thinking Amazon, so they're like, oh, every company can benefit by going global. And I'm like, no, I'm going to ask the question again, and I really want you to think about it, because we talk about imports, we talk about exports, we talk about tariffs and quotas. So we talk about those things that are important. Everyone's like, hold on, if you're starting to talk about taxing, now that I'm building my marketing plan, I don't want my company going global because I don't want to have to pay all of that. So it really gets them thinking before we even get to the fun part of talking about Google ads and if you want to run a banner ad on ESPN.com, because now they've really built up that root of everything.
Well, the other, you could go so deep on that global part of it, because I was on the part of a global side with a brand, and I saw so many mistakes where like, oh, this product's successful in the US, let's go sell it over in Europe. And then you're like, Europeans don't use the product like the way we do here, or we got to redo the packaging. We had a product that had the letter Z in it. Well, in the word was EZ, but over in England they say Z. So I'm like, no one's going to say EZ. I mean, those are all the things you got to consider, right? We had another product they wanted to sell over there, and nobody, got the underwriter's laboratory with the cords and everything. We went to sell the product over in the UK, and before that we tested it, and of course it was catching on fire. So the global side of it is not as easy as you think it is.
Yes. You know what? I'm going to piggyback off of you for a second, Kip. I'm not going to talk about it on here because I think it's a fun fact for people to look up. I always mention you should look up Pinto, the car Pinto. I think it started in like the 80s, 80s, 70s, one of the two. Look up Pinto and understand what happened. It was either in Central America or South America. This is what happens when you run a marketing campaign and you don't understand the language barriers and the translation.
Wasn't that the Nova? They do that with the Nova too, because Nova means
Did that happen with
a
the
bit
Nova
like
too?
doesn't go.
Okay,
Yeah,
I haven't heard that one. Now I have to look that one up and add that
yeah, the Nova too.
to my
Yeah,
treasure chest.
yeah. There's another famous case today. I think which was Gerber baby food, which been in the news because of the issues they're having with the contamination or what have you. But the picture of the baby is on the jar, and I believe it was in
Yep.
like South Africa or somewhere where their packaging is you put on the jar, you put on the packaging what's in the product, and so people are freaking out thinking
Oh
there's like babies.
wow.
Oh, there's so many case studies like that. Yeah,
Oh wow.
right. Yeah, there's good. Yeah,
Understand
that's
your
got to be.
global strategy, people.
Yeah, right. That's got to be fun teaching that, especially when nowadays with digital and whatnot. Thanks for
Yeah,
sharing that.
yeah,
That's. I'm sure you've got lots of stories with that.
yeah.
Um, so, what top marketing trends are you seeing right now? What's got you up at night?
Definitely, and it's gonna give me a little bit of a boost here because this is what I deal with. Definitely, forecasting analytics. Definitely, retail analytics is a huge one right now.
Mm,
As we all know, the fashion industry took a hit in 2020. With no shows, a lot of luxury brands, a lot of the big box retailers having to really go under because they weren't able to keep up with different things in the first place. Innovation was a huge thing prior to 2020. Being able to quickly move from physical store to digital or in physical virtual store, sorry, was a huge thing. And if you couldn't do it and do it quick enough, and then if your price point was above what the average household American could afford and over the last 12 months, then that's already a second ding on you. So definitely analytics in perspective. Where are consumers going? What do the trends look like? A very interesting opposite of understanding apparel retail and what that's done and understanding how that's going to trend is that in 2020, anyone who in New York, I for the most part always had bigger groceries delivered, but
mhm.
when you think about how quickly everything happened in March and in April, companies like Fresh Direct, Peapod, or anyone else who's really delivering groceries, their supply chain was not able to keep up with consumer demand because the
Yeah,
demand came so swiftly and so quickly. So what happened was it didn't take them a long period of time because I didn't really hear about it staying in the news for that long. Maybe after about a good month or 6 weeks, they kind of gotten themselves back to understanding consumer demand. But now the question is, will that still be a thing? Will we still see an uptick where to your front door grocery delivery will become a thing? Will people still have a heavy presence in buying things online, and what should retailers do to meet that consumer demand? So that's really what the big key points are right now in the industry. That and also content marketing. Content marketing is something huge. I'm actually going to do a quick post about that in AMA, I think in April or May, where we're going to be talking about how content marketing became such a hot button issue. Number one, it takes a lot of time. Businesses don't want to do it. They rather outsource that piece of
right.
business because it takes a lot of time. Number two, after 2020 and after really understanding all of different ways that you can communicate directly to your customers, businesses are now seeing that it is important to make sure that your content, your verbiage, your text, your words directly resonates with your target audience. They want to see a very alive, we call it in analytics, a freshness factor to your website and to your brand to
Mhm.
make sure that you weren't telling us the same story you were telling us 10 or 15 years ago. You're telling us something as though it's what today, March 3rd, 2021, because this is where we are and this is what we care about. So really analytics and where are consumers trending towards in the next 12 to 18 months, and then finally content marketing being a huge piece because now people are finding you over web and your presence needs to be able to resonate.
That was a lot,
Yeah.
man. Taking it all in. What do you see dying or going away, or what would you like to see go away
Oh wow, I would say what I
in
like to see.
marketing? In marketing, let's be specific,
Because I have a couple of people. No, so
right?
what I definitely see going away is I call it the set it and forget it mentality. And I'm so thrilled about that. And what I mean by that is a lot of marketers, agencies too, as well, even in house marketers for brands, a lot of them using the exact same marketing strategies and just slapping a different year on it and saying, this is what we're going to do in 2022. We're just going to, increase our return on investment by 2% because we've been trending 2% the last 3 years. When you see major shifts like this happen of what's been going over the last 12 months, I mean, it feels like 12 years. It makes you really think about, how what nuggets did we see? What did we see that we
Yeah.
would not have seen had it been any other year? What can we take now and apply that for the next few moving forward? And of course, you're kind of going to get settled. Some people are going to get settled again. I'd say around 2022, 2023, we're going to kind of start saying, oh, let's just use the number that we were using last year. But I really am excited to think that for the most part, for a lot of niche boutique agencies like mine will probably be able to see a bit of a surge because we do offer a different lens that a lot of bigger agencies don't offer. They're doing a lot of set it and forget it mentalities of just saying, oh, this is what we did for this client in this category. Let's do it for this one. Oh, let's just reuse the same plans we used last year. Now we can actually put the creativity back in marketing. Now there are different channels that are doing different numbers, doing different impressions, and it's really allowing us to really explore and see to our best potential and best strategizing what we can do.
I love it. We're coming up on our time here. I'm gonna end with that. You've got a lot up there. Besides that hair, you got a lot going on in the frame. I love it. So success to you and your agency. Thanks for wearing the Digital Summit shirt. I hope we see you speaking at one of our events soon, and in person live would be nice. And thanks for joining us. This was fantastic. Success to you and your business. I think.
Thank you.
Just talking to you, I think I think you're carving out a nice spot for you there amongst the New York agencies. It's a crowded field, but I think you're going to make it.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you so much.